My older brother offered to arrive early to help secure our parents' house for the winter, until I found the temporary partition wall already erected in the main suite. There is a unique kind of dread that sets in when you realize a sibling's sudden burst of helpfulness is actually a calculated move to displace your aging parents under their own roof. For over 40 years, my parents have lived in a beautiful, historic, colonial-style home in Princeton, New Jersey. It is a house filled with structural character, defined by its expansive main floor suite, which was specifically renovated 5 years ago to accommodate my father's declining mobility. This year, as the winter frost began to settle, my older brother, Gavin, who lives 2 states away and rarely visits, voluntarily offered to arrive 2 weeks before the holidays. He claimed he wanted to winterize the property, seal the old windows, and take the heavy physical labor off our aging parents' shoulders. Touched by his unexpected accountability, my parents gratefully welcomed him into the house while I was managing my own household responsibilities across town. The illusion of filial duty shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when I dropped by unannounced to bring my mother her weekly groceries. Walking into the foyer, the familiar smell of cedar and cinnamon was completely overpowered by the scent of fresh drywall, adhesive, and sawdust. I walked down the main hallway toward my parents' master suite, only to find a newly erected, semi-permanent wooden partition wall completely bisecting the grand room. Gavin hadn't arrived early to winterize the house. He had quietly partitioned our parents' primary living space to create a private apartment for his adult son, who had just relocated to the area. He was systematically minimizing our parents' environment, banking on the fact that their quiet nature would prevent them from fighting back. I stood in the doorway, my chest tightening as I prepared to confront my brother and dismantle the silent boundary violation he had constructed in the dark. The process of stepping over a family member's personal boundaries usually begins under the guise of protective care. To understand how a construction wall ended up in the middle of my parents' bedroom, you have to understand the dynamic between Gavin and the rest of the family. Gavin has always possessed an aggressive managerial personality. He believes that efficiency trumps sentimentality, and he has often dropped passive-aggressive hints that our parents' house is too much property for 2 people in their late 70s to maintain. I had always managed to keep him at a distance, ensuring my parents maintained their absolute autonomy in the home they built. My father's mobility challenges meant that the spacious first-floor main suite was their sanctuary. It allowed them to live comfortably without navigating the steep, historic staircase of the colonial house. The suite featured wide double doors, an attached accessible bathroom, and a large sitting area where my mother kept her grandmother's antique writing desk. It was their entire world during the cold winter months. When November arrived, Gavin suddenly called a family meeting via phone. He spoke with an unusual level of warmth, expressing deep concern about the upcoming winter forecast. He argued that the old house required extensive weatherproofing, sealing the insulation, checking the furnace ventilation, and storing the heavy outdoor patio furniture. He volunteered to take 2 weeks off his schedule to handle it all personally. My mother was deeply moved, telling me how wonderful it was that her eldest son was stepping up to protect them. I felt a lingering sense of unease, but I rationalized it as past skepticism. I agreed to let him handle the logistics, focused on my own busy work schedule. I watched him arrive with a truck full of tools, assuming he was carrying insulation rolls and window sealant. I had no idea that beneath the tarps in the back of his vehicle lay metal studs, drywall panels, and the structural components designed to quietly strip my parents of their comfort. The true scope of Gavin's plan became clear the moment I stepped across the threshold of my parents' front door on that quiet Tuesday. My parents were sitting in the living room, looking strangely subdued. My mother was holding a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the floor, while the unmistakable sound of a power drill echoed from the back of the house. When I asked her what Gavin was working on, she offered a practiced, hesitant smile and murmured that Gavin was just optimizing the space for the winter. Unsettled by the tension in the room, I walked down the primary corridor toward the master suite. The double doors were propped open, and the grand space had been completely transformed into a chaotic construction zone. A temporary floor-to-ceiling partition wall made of light timber and sheetrock ran directly down the center of the room. It effectively cut the suite completely in half, trapping my parents' bed and dresser on one narrow side, while isolating the large sitting area and my mother's antique desk on the other. Gavin was standing on a stepladder, smoothly applying joint compound to the drywall seams. Standing right next to the ladder was his 24-year-old son, Julian, who was busy carrying in heavy plastic storage bins filled with his personal winter wardrobe, shoes, and electronic equipment. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Julian had recently graduated and accepted a position in the city, and instead of helping him find an apartment, Gavin had decided to build him one for free inside our parents' private quarters. My deliberate approach made Gavin look down from the ladder. His expression didn't register guilt. Instead, he adopted a smooth, professional posture, wiping his hands on a towel as he climbed down. He smiled warmly, as if he were presenting a brilliant home improvement project, entirely unbothered by the sheer arrogance of the structure he had built without a single word of consultation. "What exactly is going on here, Gavin?" I asked, my voice maintaining a low, steady register that forced Julian to stop carrying the bins. Gavin offered a dismissive wave of his hand, leaning against the newly erected partition wall. He argued that from a practical standpoint, our parents only utilized the bed portion of the suite during the winter months anyway. He claimed that by closing off the sitting area, they would save thousands of dollars on heating bills because the furnace wouldn't have to work as hard to warm a large space. He then casually added that since Julian needed a quiet place to transition into his new career, this setup was a perfect, mutually beneficial arrangement for the entire family. "You built a wall in our parents' bedroom without telling anyone," I replied softly, refusing to match his confident tone with shouting. "You used the excuse of winterizing their home to quietly establish a permanent residence for your son, completely compromising their privacy and their comfort. This isn't about utility, Gavin. This is a massive violation of their boundaries." "You're reacting emotionally," Gavin countered smoothly, pointing to the structural framework. "Look at the layout. It's a completely independent space for Julian. He doesn't disturb them, and he can keep an eye on them during the winter. It's a smart utilization of family assets. Mom and Dad already agreed to let me handle the winter adjustments." As he spoke, my eyes traveled past his shoulder to the open toolbox sitting on my mother's displaced antique desk. Resting right on top of his blueprints was a leather-bound folder containing a stack of official, pre-filled real estate documents. I stepped forward, picking up the paperwork before Gavin could intervene. My heart dropped as I scanned the text. It was a formal application for a structural accessory dwelling unit permit, paired with a power of attorney draft that would give Gavin sole authority over the property's historical layout modifications. He hadn't just built a temporary wall for the holidays. Gavin was quietly initiating a legal and physical restructuring of our parents' estate, using his son's physical presence to establish a permanent claim over the ground floor, entirely bypassing our parents' long-term security. The emotional weight of the discovery was immense, but I kept my focus entirely on the immediate reality. I carried the real estate folder out into the living room, placing it directly on the coffee table in front of my parents. I knelt down next to my mother, taking her hand. "Mom, Dad," I said gently, "Gavin is not just weatherproofing the house. He has built a permanent separation wall in your bedroom to move Julian in, and he is trying to alter the legal structure of your home. Is this what you actually want?" My father looked toward the hallway, a quiet, tired dignity in his eyes. He admitted that Gavin had pressured them, telling them they could no longer manage the house safely on their own, and that having a young adult in the suite was the only way to keep the property viable. My mother's eyes filled with quiet tears as she confessed she felt completely invisible in her own home, deeply hurting that her private sitting space had been taken away. Gavin walked into the living room, his defensive posture ready, but the profound disappointment on our parents' faces stopped him completely. The polished certainty drained from his face, leaving him looking suddenly exposed in front of the family he had tried to manipulate. "This construction stops today, Gavin," I stated firmly, standing up to face him. "You will dismantle that wall immediately, and you will remove every single legal document from this house. You do not get to manage our parents' lives or treat their sanctuary as free real estate for your own convenience." For a long moment, the room was completely silent. Gavin looked at our father, whose stern, quiet nod confirmed that the boundary had been definitively drawn. Realizing that his strategy had completely disintegrated, Gavin's defensive shield vanished. He looked down at the folder on the table, his shoulders dropping. "I thought I was helping," Gavin muttered, his voice dropping its clinical tone. "Julian's expenses were building up, and I thought if I could secure this part of the house, it would solve his housing problem while giving me a foothold to manage the estate later. I convinced myself it was the right move for everyone. I didn't mean to make you both feel helpless. You cannot use our parents' vulnerability to solve your own logistical problems, Gavin," I said softly. Family care requires honesty and respect, not structural manipulation behind closed doors. Facing the immediate consequences, Gavin took full accountability. Over the next 48 hours, he and Julian worked continuously to dismantle the partition wall, carefully removing the studs, patching the drywall, and repainting the main suite back to its original historic finish. My mother's antique writing desk was returned to its rightful place by the window, and the double doors were reopened to let the winter sunlight fill the room. Julian quietly moved his belongings into a local rental apartment, realizing that family support must never come at the cost of his grandparents' dignity. While the winter adjustments were completed using standard exterior insulation, the experience established a permanent, unshakable boundary within our family dynamic. A home's legacy is built on the peace and autonomy of the parents who created it, and those boundaries can never be remodeled for the sake of personal convenience.